The morning began like any other Tuesday in rural Montana. My name is Ethan Blackwood, 30 years old, and I run the same ranch my family has operated for 5 generations. The Highland cattle grazing in my pasture aren't just livestock, they are living history. Only 47 of these magnificent beasts remain in the entire state. Their long russet coats and curved horns are a testament to Scottish heritage that my great-great-grandfather brought to America in 1892. Dad used to say they were worth more than gold, not because of money, but because of what they represented. Son, he'd told me, just before the farming accident took his life 14 years ago. These cattle are our legacy. Promise me you'll protect them. I'd been protecting them ever since teaching myself agricultural law during long winter nights, preparing for the day someone would try to take what wasn't theirs. That day came with the sound of gunfire. One of my bulls was injured, the grass around him stained with blood. I didn't even have time to process what had happened before a second gunshot rang out from the far end of the field. I ran, heart pounding, like it might rip through my chest. Strangers with rifles were stalking through my herd. Priceless heritage bulls protected under federal law. And standing beside them, with that cold smile on her face, was Karen, the HOA president. They thought I'd stay quiet. They were wrong. This is my land. These are the bloodlines of my ancestors, and this will be a lawsuit they never saw coming. Karen Sterling had moved into the Meadowbrook Valley development 6 months ago, a sprawling suburban community that had sprouted like mushrooms after rain just 2 miles from my property line. She'd immediately appointed herself HOA president, though I'd later discover the real president, elderly Mrs. Henderson, had mysteriously died 3 months prior. Karen was 45, sharp as a blade, and carried herself like someone who'd never lost an argument in her life. Her blonde hair was always perfectly styled, her business suits pressed to military precision, and her smile could freeze water in July. What I didn't know yet was that behind that polished exterior lurked someone far more dangerous than a typical suburban busybody. The gunshots shattered the peaceful morning like a sledgehammer through glass. My border collie Scout started barking frantically as I sprinted across the field, my boots squelching through the dew-soaked grass. The scene that greeted me was something out of a nightmare. 3 men in camouflage gear were moving systematically through my herd, rifles in hand, while one of my prize bulls lay motionless near the pond, blood pooling beneath his massive frame, his once proud horns now pointing uselessly at the sky. The other cattle were huddled together, their usual calm demeanor replaced by obvious distress. These weren't just any animals, they were descendants of the original Highland stock, each one irreplaceable. "What the hell are you doing on my property?" I shouted, my voice carrying across the field with the authority of someone who'd been defending this land since he was 16. The hunters looked up from their work, casual, as if they were discussing the weather. One of them, a stocky man with a thick beard, actually dared to wave at me like we were old friends. But it was Karen's presence that made my blood run cold. She stood there in her pristine white blazer, completely out of place in the muddy field, holding a manila folder like it was some kind of shield. "Mr. Blackwood," she called out, her voice carrying that particular tone that suburban monarchs reserve for peasants who dare question their authority, "I have some documentation here that I think you'll find very interesting." She approached with the confidence of someone who held all the cards, her heels somehow navigating the uneven terrain without a single stumble. The manila folder was thick, official-looking, filled with papers that had enough government letterhead to choke a horse. "This is a special permit from the State Agriculture Department. These animals have been classified as diseased livestock, and we're authorized to humanely dispose of them before they spread contamination to the surrounding area. My hands trembled as I grabbed the papers, not from fear, but from pure rage. The documents looked legitimate, complete with official seals and signatures that meant nothing to me, but everything to the legal system. According to the paperwork, my cattle had tested positive for some obscure bovine disease I'd never heard of, a condition that posed such a significant threat to public health that immediate extermination was not just recommended, but mandated. The irony wasn't lost on me that these were the same animals that had been thriving under my care for over a decade. "This is impossible," I said, my voice barely controlled as I scanned the documents. These cattle were inspected just 3 months ago by the state veterinarian. They received a clean bill of health. But even as I spoke, I could see the hunters continuing their grim work, moving toward another section of the herd with the methodical efficiency of professionals who'd done this before. Scout was still barking, running in circles around the fallen bull, as if he could somehow bring the magnificent creature back to life through sheer determination. That's when Dr. Miguel Torres appeared like an angel of mercy, his veterinary truck kicking up dust as it barreled down my access road. Miguel had been my friend since high school, a brilliant veterinarian who'd gotten himself fired from the state agriculture department 2 years ago for refusing to sign off on the destruction of healthy animals. He'd chosen principles over paycheck, a decision that had cost him his government job, but earned him my eternal respect. Now, he worked as an independent vet, serving ranchers who valued honesty over bureaucratic convenience. "Ethan, what's going on here?" Miguel called out as he jogged toward us, his medical bag bouncing against his hip. His dark eyes took in the scene, the fallen bull, the armed hunters, and Karen's self-satisfied expression. Without waiting for an explanation, he dropped to his knees beside the dead animal, his trained hands already beginning a field examination. "This animal shows no signs of disease," he announced. After just a few minutes, his voice carrying the authority of someone who'd spent 15 years diagnosing livestock ailments. "The coat is healthy, the eyes are clear, muscle tone is excellent. Whatever killed this bull, it wasn't disease." Karen's perfect composure cracked just slightly, like a hairline fracture in expensive porcelain. "Dr. Torres, I'm afraid your expertise isn't relevant here. We have official documentation from the state signed by qualified professionals who outrank any independent contractor." The way she said independent contractor made it sound like a communicable disease, her disdain palpable in the morning air. But Miguel wasn't someone who backed down from a fight, especially when animal welfare was at stake. "Lady, I've been examining livestock longer than you've been playing dress-up in suburban politics," Miguel shot back, his usually gentle demeanor replaced by protective fury. "These animals are healthy, and anyone with basic veterinary training could see that. Whatever game you're playing here, it ends now." He stood up, brushing dirt from his knees, his compact frame somehow seeming larger than the armed men surrounding us. The silence that followed was deafening, broken only by the distant lowing of my remaining cattle and the whisper of wind through the grass. Karen's ice-blue eyes darted between Miguel and me, calculating her next move, like a chess master who'd just realized her opponent wasn't the amateur she'd expected. The hunters had stopped their work, clearly waiting for orders from someone who was supposed to be in charge, but suddenly seemed less certain of her authority. Then, Karen played what she thought was her trump card, reaching into her blazer pocket and producing another set of documents. "Mr. Blackwood, there's something else you should know," she said, her smile returning with venomous sweetness. "This isn't just about diseased cattle anymore. She handed me a different set of papers, these bearing the seal of the county courthouse. This is a writ of seizure for your entire property, effective immediately. It seems some outstanding issues with your land ownership need to be resolved through the court system. My world tilted on its axis as I read the legal jargon, my self-taught understanding of agricultural law suddenly feeling woefully inadequate. According to these new documents, someone had filed a claim disputing my family's ownership of the ranch, citing irregularities in the original land grant from 1892. The paperwork demanded that I vacate the premises within 48 hours, pending a full legal review. But as I looked up from the documents, I caught something in Karen's expression that didn't quite fit. For just a moment, her mask of authority slipped, revealing something that looked almost like guilt. It was there and gone in an instant, but it was enough to plant a seed of suspicion in my mind. Something about this whole situation felt wrong. The timing was too convenient, the paperwork too perfect, the execution too smooth for a spontaneous government action. That's when I made the decision that would change everything. Instead of fighting back immediately, I decided to play along. "Well, I said, forcing my voice to remain calm. "I guess if this is all legal and above board, there's nothing I can do about it right now." Karen's eyebrows rose slightly, clearly surprised by my apparent capitulation. What Karen didn't know was that I had been preparing for something like this for years. Hidden cameras monitored every inch of my property, and if someone was going to steal my family's legacy, they were going to do it on camera. As the hunters resumed their work, and Karen supervised with satisfaction, I was already planning my counterattack. These people had made one critical mistake. They'd assumed I was just another helpless rural victim who would roll over when confronted with official-looking paperwork. They were about to learn just how wrong they were. 48 hours. That's all the time I had before Karen's legal machinery would grind my family's legacy into dust. The courthouse summons felt like a death sentence. In my hands, official stamps and signatures that could erase 5 generations of Blackwood sweat and sacrifice. I sat in my kitchen that evening, surrounded by boxes of legal documents I'd been collecting for years, preparing for a battle I'd always known would come. The irony wasn't lost on me that I'd been teaching myself agricultural law since Dad's death, and now I was about to face the ultimate test of that self-education. The first thing I did was call my insurance company, pretending to update my livestock coverage while fishing for information about recent claims or investigations. What I discovered made my blood run cold. 3 other ranchers in neighboring counties had faced similar disease outbreaks in the past 6 months. All of them, coincidentally, were located on prime development land. All of them had been forced to sell after their cattle were destroyed and their operations shut down. The pattern was too obvious to ignore, too systematic to be a coincidence. That night, I found exactly what I was looking for at Jimmy's bar. 3 locals were nursing beers and bitter memories, former ranch owners who'd lost everything to the same mysterious bovine disease. Tom Harrison looked up when I approached. "Ethan Blackwood," he said, his voice heavy with recognition. "Same song, different verse, isn't it?" What Tom told me was a masterclass in bureaucratic corruption. The same veterinary inspector had signed off on all 3 ranch condemnations, Dr. Marcus Webb, who specialized in finding diseases that other vets couldn't detect. The same legal firm had handled the property seizures, and the same development company had purchased the land at below-market prices. But Tom mentioned something crucial. That HOA lady Karen, whatever her name is, She came around asking questions about my property 3 weeks before the inspection, said she was conducting some kind of community health survey. The other ranchers nodded in agreement. Karen had visited all of them, scouting targets for her operation. I drove home with a plan forming. If Karen was running a con game, she had a weakness every con artist does. And I suspected Karen's was her need to appear legitimate. She'd gone to extraordinary lengths to create the illusion of legal authority, but forgery is a federal crime, and impersonating government officials is something the FBI takes very seriously. The next morning brought my first real breakthrough. I was reviewing the HOA documentation that Karen had used to justify her presence on my property when I noticed something that made my pulse quicken. The signature on the official letterhead belonged to Mrs. Helen Henderson, the original HOA president, who'd supposedly appointed Karen as her successor. The problem was I'd done some digging into Mrs. Henderson's background. Helen Henderson hadn't just died 3 months ago. She'd been declared mentally incompetent by the county court 6 months before her death, which meant she legally couldn't have appointed anyone to anything. Karen hadn't just stepped into a power vacuum when Mrs. Henderson died. She'd been forging the old woman's signature for months, running the HOA like her personal kingdom, while the real president was suffering from dementia in a nursing home. It was fraud, pure and simple, but it was also evidence that Karen's entire operation was built on deception, which meant everything else she'd done was probably equally bogus. I spent the afternoon making phone calls, using my most official-sounding voice to request information from various government agencies. What I discovered was that Dr. Marcus Webb, the veterinary inspector who'd signed my cattle's death warrant, had been suspended from the state agriculture department 2 months ago for falsifying inspection reports. The permit Karen had waved around was signed by someone who no longer had the authority to sign his time card, let alone authorize the destruction of federally protected livestock. But Karen had made one mistake that would prove to be her undoing. In her eagerness to appear thorough and official, she'd created a paper trail that was too perfect for a genuine government operation. Real bureaucracy is messy and inefficient, full of delays and contradictions. Karen's documents read like someone's fantasy of how government should work, not how it does work. That evening, I received a call that changed everything. The voice was gravelly and tired. "Mr. Blackwood, this is Sheriff Bobby Chen. I think we need to talk." Bobby had been the county sheriff for 8 years, known for his integrity and his refusal to play political games, which made his next words shocking. "I've been watching what's happening to you and the other ranchers. There are things you need to know about Karen Sterling and her operation, things that could help you fight back. But we can't talk over the phone, and we can't meet at my office too many ears, if you know what I mean." We arranged to meet at the old grain elevator outside town, an abandoned building that had been gathering rust and memories for the past decade. As I drove toward our rendezvous, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was about to learn something that would change everything I thought I knew about this situation. Sheriff Chen wasn't the type of man to request clandestine meetings unless the stakes were higher than I'd realized. The grain elevator loomed against the darkening sky like a monument to Montana's agricultural past. Bobby's patrol car was already there when I arrived, and the man himself was pacing in the shadows like a caged animal. When he saw me, his relief was palpable. "Ethan," he said, his voice barely above a whisper, "I've been waiting for someone like you to come along. Someone who wouldn't just roll over and take it." He looked around nervously. "What I'm about to tell you could end my career, but I can't watch this happen anymore." The truth, as Bobby laid it out in the growing darkness, was worse than I'd imagined, and better than I'd hoped. Bobby Chen's revelation hit me like a sledgehammer to the chest. Karen Sterling wasn't just some power-hungry suburban queen bee with delusions of grandeur. She was the front woman for a sophisticated land grab operation that had been systematically destroying family ranches across 3 counties. The sheriff's hands shook as he lit a cigarette, his usual composure cracked like old leather. "She's got people everywhere, Ethan. County clerks, state inspectors, even a judge or 2. They've turned bureaucracy into a weapon, and they're using it to steal land that's been in families for generations." The scope of the conspiracy was breathtaking in its audacity. Karen had been studying property records for over a year, identifying ranches with valuable land and elderly or isolated owners. She'd then orchestrate a series of bureaucratic attacks designed to force sales at below-market prices. The fake disease outbreaks were just one tool in her arsenal. She'd also used environmental violations, zoning disputes, and tax assessments to pressure families into selling their ancestral homes for pennies on the dollar. It was economic warfare disguised as civic responsibility, and it was working perfectly until now. But here's the thing, Bobby continued, flicking ash into the darkness. "I've been documenting everything, every fake inspection, every forged signature, every bribe that changed hands. I thought I was building a case, but the deeper I dug, the more I realized how many people were involved. Karen's got leverage on half the county government, and the other half is too scared to cross her." His voice carried the weight of a man who'd watched justice being perverted and felt powerless to stop it. "My wife has cancer, Ethan, stage 3. The treatments are expensive, and our insurance doesn't cover everything. When Karen approached me with an envelope full of cash and a promise that more would come if I just looked the other way, occasionally He didn't finish the sentence, but he didn't need to. I could see the shame burning in his eyes, the way a good man looks when he's been forced to compromise his principles for love. Bobby Chen had sold his soul to save his wife, and Karen had turned him into an unwitting accomplice in her scheme. But guilt, I was learning, could be a powerful motivator for redemption. The next morning brought Karen's media blitz, and it was a thing of beauty in its calculated malevolence. Local news crews appeared at my property line like vultures gathering around roadkill, their cameras pointed at my ranch, while reporters breathlessly described the environmental health crisis unfolding in rural Montana. Karen had transformed herself from suburban HOA president into a concerned citizen activist, complete with a freshly designed website and social media campaign that painted me as a reckless rancher whose negligence threatened the entire community. The Facebook attack started within hours. My rancher's page was flooded with one-star reviews from accounts created days earlier. The reviews multiplied like a virus, each one fake, but convincing enough to fool casual observers. Karen had weaponized social media with the precision of a military operation. But I wasn't about to let her control the narrative. That afternoon, I set up my phone on a fence post and went live on Facebook, walking viewers through my ranch while providing real-time commentary on the condition of my cattle. "Folks, I want you to see what healthy Highland cattle look like," I said, approaching a group of my animals who were peacefully grazing in the afternoon sun. These animals have been thriving on this land for over a century. Their coats are shiny, their eyes are bright, and they're displaying normal social behaviors. Does this look like a diseased herd to you? The live stream went viral within hours, shared by ranching communities across the country who recognized the attack on my property as a threat to agricultural life everywhere. Comments poured in from farmers and ranchers who'd faced similar pressures, creating an impromptu support network that stretched from Montana to Texas. But for every genuine supporter, 3 obvious trolls were posting inflammatory comments designed to derail the conversation. That evening, Karen escalated the conflict with a master stroke of manipulative theater. A professionally produced video appeared on YouTube titled "The Truth About Blackwood Ranch," featuring what appeared to be hidden camera footage of me supposedly mistreating my animals. The video showed someone in clothing similar to mine roughly handling cattle, using electric prods inappropriately, and leaving animals without adequate food or water. It was expertly edited, compelling enough to fool anyone who didn't know the truth, and completely fabricated. The video's production value was too high for amateur work. Someone had invested serious money in creating this deception, hiring actors and renting equipment to stage scenes that never happened on my property. But Karen had made one critical error. In her rush to destroy my reputation, the cattle in her fake video weren't Highland cattle at all. They were standard Angus cattle, easily distinguishable from my rare Scottish breeds by anyone with basic knowledge of livestock. I called Miguel immediately, asking him to review the video with his professional eye. His response was swift and definitive. "This is garbage, Ethan. The animals in this video are completely different breeds, and the handling techniques they're showing would never work with Highlands anyway. Any veterinarian worth his degree would spot this as fake immediately." But the damage was already spreading across the internet like wildfire. Karen's video had been shared thousands of times, picked up by animal rights groups who were understandably outraged by what they believed they were seeing. My phone rang constantly with death threats from strangers who'd been manipulated into believing I was a monster. As I sat in my kitchen that night, surrounded by printouts of fake reviews and screenshots of threatening messages, I realized that Karen had made this personal in a way that went far beyond simple land theft. She wasn't just trying to steal my property, she was trying to destroy my reputation, my livelihood, and my connection to the community that had been my family's home for 5 generations. But she'd also given me exactly what I needed to fight back. Every fake review, every bot comment, every piece of manufactured outrage was evidence of a conspiracy that reached far beyond rural Montana. Karen thought she was being clever, but she was building the case against herself, one digital breadcrumb at a time. Tomorrow, the real battle would begin. The knock on my door came at dawn, sharp and official, like the sound of a coffin being nailed shut. I opened it to find 3 vehicles parked in my driveway, 2 state agriculture department trucks, and Sheriff Bobby Chen's patrol car. Bobby wouldn't meet my eyes as he handed me yet another official document, this one bearing so many government seals it looked like a Christmas tree decorated with bureaucratic ornaments. "I'm sorry, Ethan," he whispered, his voice heavy with shame. "Emergency inspection order. I have to escort them." The lead inspector was a thin, nervous man named Dr. Marcus Webb, the same veterinarian Bobby had warned me about, the one who'd supposedly been suspended months ago. His suspension had been mysteriously lifted just in time for my ranch inspection. He carried a metal briefcase that looked more like a bomb disposal kit than veterinary equipment, and his 2 assistants moved with the mechanical precision of people following a well-rehearsed script. "Mr. Blackwood," Dr. Webb announced, in a voice that sounded like he was reading from a teleprompter, "we're here to conduct mandatory testing of your livestock in response to credible reports of disease contamination. Please direct us to your cattle immediately." His assistants were already unpacking equipment from their truck, including several syringes filled with clear liquid and plastic containers labeled with biohazard symbols. That's when I noticed the cameras. Karen had positioned herself and a small crew of citizen journalists just outside my property line, recording everything through telephoto lenses. She'd even brought a local news reporter, turning my ranch into the set for her reality show about government accountability and public safety. Miguel's timing was perfect, as if he'd been watching from a distance and waiting for exactly the right moment to intervene. His veterinary truck came rumbling down my access road just as Dr. Webb was preparing to inject one of my prize bulls with whatever mystery substance he brought in that briefcase. "Hold on there, friend," Miguel called out, jumping from his truck with the confidence of someone who knew exactly what he was doing. "I'm Dr. Miguel Torres, an independent veterinary consultant. I'm here to observe this inspection and ensure proper protocols are followed." Dr. Webb's face went pale as Miguel approached like a poker player who just realized his opponent could see his cards. "Dr. Torres, this is an official state inspection. Your presence isn't required or requested." But Miguel was already examining the equipment spread across the truck's tailgate, his trained eye taking inventory of syringes, vials, and testing apparatus with growing alarm. "Interesting setup you've got here," Miguel said, picking up one of the filled syringes and holding it up to the light. "Mind telling me what's in these injections?" "Standard testing protocol," Dr. Webb replied, quickly, but his hands were shaking as he reached for the syringe. "We inject a small amount of diagnostic agent and then monitor the animal's reaction to determine if disease is present." It sounded reasonable enough, except for one small problem that Miguel immediately identified. "That's not how bovine disease testing works," Miguel said, his voice carrying the authority of 15 years in veterinary medicine. "You take blood samples and analyze them in a laboratory. You don't inject unknown substances into healthy animals." What Miguel discovered made my blood run cold. The syringes weren't filled with diagnostic agents at all. They contained a cocktail of bacteria and toxins that would have made my cattle genuinely sick within hours, providing retroactive justification for their destruction. It was biological warfare disguised as veterinary care, and Miguel had caught them red-handed. But Karen had prepared for this contingency. Even as Miguel was documenting Dr. Webb's illegal activities with his phone camera, she was making calls to judges and court clerks, activating the next phase of her plan. Within 2 hours, a sheriff's deputy arrived with an emergency court order that made my worst nightmares come true. The judge had granted an immediate property seizure based on imminent public health threats and obstruction of official government inspections. "You have 30 minutes to gather personal belongings," the deputy announced, his voice echoing with the finality of a death sentence. "This property is being sealed by court order pending full decontamination and legal review." Bobby Chen stood behind him, his face a mask of professional neutrality that couldn't quite hide his anguish. Karen's victory celebration was as sickening as it was premature. She held an impromptu press conference right there in my driveway, positioning herself in front of my family home, while explaining to the cameras how swift government action had prevented a potential agricultural disaster. Her performance was Oscar-worthy, complete with carefully rehearsed talking points about public safety and environmental responsibility. As I loaded my few possessions into my truck, I caught Karen's eye through the crowd of reporters and government officials. For just a moment, she let her mask slip, revealing a smile of pure triumph that chilled me to the bone. She thought she'd won, that her combination of legal manipulation and bureaucratic theater had finally broken me. She had no idea that every second of this illegal seizure was being recorded by the hidden cameras I'd installed months ago. What Karen didn't know was that I'd been preparing for this exact scenario for over a year. Motion-activated cameras covered every inch of my property, digital recording equipment, captured audio from multiple locations, and backup servers stored everything in secure off-site locations. She'd just staged her prosecution complete with high-definition video evidence of conspiracy, fraud, and violation of civil rights. As I drove away from the ranch, that had been my family's home for 5 generations, I wasn't feeling defeated. I was feeling like a hunter who just watched his prey walk directly into a perfectly constructed trap. Karen Sterling thought she was celebrating victory, but she was documenting her destruction. The mouse had just swallowed the cheese, and the trap was about to spring shut. 3 days after losing my ranch, I was living out of a motel room that smelled like disinfectant and broken dreams, surrounded by boxes of legal documents and a laptop that had become my command center for the most important investigation of my life. The walls were covered with printouts, photos, and timeline charts that looked like something from a crime thriller, except this was real. And the criminals were wearing business suits instead of ski masks. I'd been digging into Karen Sterling's background for 72 hours straight, surviving on coffee and determination, and what I'd discovered was about to blow this whole conspiracy wide open. Karen's real name was Karen Sterling Mackenzie, and she wasn't just some ambitious suburban queen bee with delusions of grandeur. She was the ex-wife of billionaire real estate developer Robert Mackenzie, CEO of Sterling Development Corporation, one of the largest commercial property developers in the western United States. Their divorce had been ugly, and public splashed across business magazines 3 years ago when Karen accused Robert of using their marriage as a cover for tax evasion and environmental crimes. She'd walked away with a substantial settlement and what appeared to be insider knowledge of her ex-husband's business practices. According to court records from their divorce proceedings, Karen had lost their 8-year-old son, Tommy, in a car accident 2 years before their separation. The accident had happened on a rural highway during a family trip to inspect potential development sites in Montana. Tommy had been airlifted to the nearest trauma center, but the closest facility was over an hour away by helicopter, and he died en route from injuries that might have been survivable with immediate medical attention. Karen had blamed the remote location and lack of infrastructure for her son's death, and apparently she'd never forgiven rural communities for what she saw as their backward resistance to development and progress. The psychological profile that emerged painted a picture of a woman consumed by grief and guilt, someone who'd channeled her loss into a crusade against the rural lifestyle she blamed for her son's death. She genuinely believed she was saving lives by forcing the development of remote areas, bringing hospitals, emergency services, and modern infrastructure to communities that she saw as dangerously isolated. It was a twisted form of maternal protection, extending to strangers the care she'd been unable to provide for her child. But somewhere along the way, grief had curdled into greed. The Sterling Development Corporation wasn't interested in building hospitals or emergency services in rural Montana. They wanted to construct luxury casinos and resort complexes, turning family farms into playgrounds for wealthy tourists. Karen had allowed her ex-husband to exploit her pain and her connections, transforming her from a grieving mother into a corporate weapon designed to clear land for maximum profit development. That revelation was devastating enough, but it paled in comparison to what happened next. Around midnight, on my 3rd day in the motel, I heard a soft knock on my door, followed by a voice I recognized immediately. "Ethan, it's Bobby Chen. We need to talk." I opened the door to find the sheriff standing in the parking lot shadows, his uniform wrinkled and his eyes red-rimmed from what looked like days without sleep. He was holding a manila envelope and shaking like a leaf in a windstorm. "I can't do this anymore," Bobby whispered as he stepped into my room, his voice cracking under the weight of confession. "My wife's cancer treatments are bankrupting us, and Karen promised she'd cover our medical bills if I just looked the other way. But watching them steal your family's ranch, seeing what they did to your cattle, I kept thinking about my own kids and what kind of world I'm helping to create for them. He handed me the envelope with trembling fingers, and what I found inside was pure gold photographs, audio recordings, and detailed notes documenting every aspect of Karen's illegal activities. Bobby had been secretly recording his conversations with Karen for weeks, capturing her admissions of forgery, bribery, and conspiracy. He'd photographed meetings between Karen and fake government inspectors, documented the exchange of envelopes full of cash, and even recorded phone calls where she discussed her plans to frame other ranchers. The evidence was overwhelming, detailed, and damning. More importantly, it proved that Karen's operation extended far beyond my ranch, encompassing a network of corruption that reached into multiple state agencies. There's something else, Bobby continued, his voice barely audible above the motel's ancient air conditioning unit. Karen's been bragging about this being just the beginning. She's got lists of target properties, development plans for the entire county, and enough bribed officials to steamroll anyone who gets in her way. Your ranch was supposed to be the proof of concept, the demonstration that her system works. If she succeeds with you, she's planning to scale up the operation across 3 states. The scope of the conspiracy was breathtaking, but so was the opportunity it presented. Bobby's recordings didn't just document crimes against my property, they revealed a pattern of racketeering that crossed state lines and involved federal agencies. That made it a matter for the FBI, not local law enforcement, which meant Karen's network of corrupted officials couldn't protect her from investigation. As Bobby prepared to leave, he turned back with one final revelation that made my heart race. There's a federal agent who's been asking questions about Karen's activities, Agent Sarah Mitchell from the Denver field office. She's been investigating Sterling Development Corporation for environmental crimes, and she's very interested in talking to anyone who's had dealings with Karen Sterling. He handed me a business card with Agent Mitchell's contact information, and for the first time in days, I felt genuine hope spreading through my chest, like sunrise after a long night. The next morning, I made the most important phone call of my life. Agent Mitchell's voice was crisp and professional, but I could hear the excitement building as I described my situation and offered to share Bobby's evidence. "Mr. Blackwood," she said after I'd finished my summary, "you may have just handed us the key to a case we've been building for over a year. Sterling Development has been on our radar for environmental racketeering, but we've never had inside documentation of their ground-level operations. Your sheriff friend just gave us enough evidence to bring down an entire criminal enterprise." She leaned back in her chair, already planning the takedown with the methodical precision of a chess master positioning pieces for checkmate. But Agent Mitchell's news came with an urgent warning. Karen Sterling is escalating her operations faster than we anticipated. We have intelligence suggesting she's planning to move against 2 more ranches this week, and she's hired private security contractors to ensure there's no interference. If we're going to stop her, we need to act now, and we need your help to do it. The plan she outlined was dangerous but brilliant. I would return to Montana and publicly challenge Karen's seizure of my property, drawing her into a confrontation that would be monitored and recorded by federal agents. The drive back to Montana felt like traveling toward a showdown at high noon, except instead of 6 shooters, we'd be wielding legal documents and surveillance equipment. Agent Mitchell's team had already infiltrated the area, posing as journalists, environmental activists, and concerned citizens who wanted to witness the resolution of the Blackwood Ranch controversy. Karen had no idea that her media circus was about to become the stage for her destruction. I arrived at my property line just as the sun was setting, casting long shadows across the land that had been my family's home for 5 generations. Karen had wasted no time in beginning her development preparations. Construction equipment sat parked around my ranch house like metallic vultures, and surveyors had already begun marking boundaries for the luxury casino resort that Sterling Development planned to build on my family's graves. The sight filled me with rage so pure and focused that I could have powered the entire county with it. Karen emerged from a white Mercedes like a general surveying conquered territory, her blonde hair perfectly styled despite the dusty conditions, and her business suit pressed to corporate perfection. She'd brought an entourage of lawyers, contractors, and local officials who formed a protective circle around her as she approached the property line where I stood. The cameras were rolling both hers and the FBI's, though she had no idea about the federal surveillance that was documenting her every word and gesture. "Mr. Blackwood," she called out, her voice carrying that particular tone of condescending sympathy that suburban royalty reserves for the peasants they've just crushed. "I'm surprised to see you here. I thought you understood that this property is no longer yours to visit." She gestured toward the construction equipment with proprietary satisfaction. "Sterling Development is moving quickly to remediate the environmental damage your cattle operation caused to this pristine area." That's when I played my first card, pulling out the folder of evidence that Bobby had provided and holding it up for the cameras to see. "Karen, I think there are some things about this environmental damage that the public should know, like the fact that Dr. Marcus Webb was suspended from the state agriculture department 2 months before he allegedly inspected my cattle, or the fact that the HOA president who supposedly appointed you has been dead for 3 months." The color drained from Karen's face like water from a punctured balloon, but she recovered quickly, her lawyer stepping forward to whisper urgently in her ear. "Those are serious accusations, Mr. Blackwood," Karen replied, but her voice had lost some of its earlier confidence. "I hope you have legal representation because defamation lawsuits can be very expensive." It was a threat disguised as concern, the kind of intimidation tactic that had probably worked on other victims who lacked the resources to fight back. But I wasn't other victims, and I had the federal government backing my play. That's when Bobby Chen appeared, walking slowly across the field in his sheriff's uniform with his head held high for the first time in weeks. The transformation was remarkable guilt and shame, replaced by determination and resolve as he approached Karen's group of enablers and collaborators. "Karen Sterling," he announced in his official voice, "I'm placing you under arrest for conspiracy, fraud, and violation of federal racketeering laws." The look of shock on her face was worth every sleepless night I'd spent in that motel room. But Karen's composure cracked completely when Agent Mitchell stepped out from behind one of the news vans, her FBI credentials visible as she approached with backup agents flanking her on both sides. "Sheriff Chen," Agent Mitchell said with professional courtesy, "this arrest falls under federal jurisdiction. Karen Sterling Mackenzie, you're under arrest for conspiracy to commit mail fraud, wire fraud, and violation of the Racketeer, Influenced, and Corrupt Organizations Act." The moment of Karen's capture was everything I'd hoped for and more. Her mask of suburban respectability finally slipped, completely revealing the desperate criminal underneath as she realized the scope of the trap that had closed around her. "You don't understand," she screamed, her perfectly styled hair coming loose as FBI agents placed her in handcuffs. "I was trying to save lives. Rural communities are death traps. My son died because there wasn't a hospital close enough to save him." For a moment, standing there in the fading light with federal agents swarming around the wreckage of Karen's criminal empire, I almost felt sorry for her. She'd started with genuine grief and legitimate concerns, but somewhere along the way, pain had twisted into greed, and justice had become revenge. She'd convinced herself that destroying family ranches was somehow honoring her dead son's memory, when in reality, she was just feeding her ex-husband's corporate machine. As the last of Karen's accomplices were loaded into federal vehicles and the construction equipment was sealed, as evidence, I stood on my family's land for the first time in a week and felt something I hadn't experienced since Dad's death: complete peace. The ranch was mine again. The cattle were safe, and the people who tried to steal my legacy were facing decades in federal prison. Justice, it turned out, was even sweeter than revenge. The federal courthouse in Helena was packed with ranchers, farmers, and rural families who'd driven hundreds of miles to witness Karen Sterling's sentencing. For 3 months, the trial had dominated local news as prosecutors laid out the stunning scope of her criminal enterprise. Sterling Development Corporation had been systematically destroying family ranches across 4 states, using Karen's network of corrupted officials to steal land worth over $50 million. The evidence was overwhelming, damning, and satisfying to watch unfold in open court. Judge Patricia Hayes, a 60-year-old federal magistrate whose own brother ran cattle in eastern Montana, had followed the case with the careful attention of someone who understood exactly what was at stake. Karen sat at the defendant's table in an orange jumpsuit, her perfectly styled hair now pulled back in a simple ponytail, her corporate armor replaced by the humble uniform of the convicted. "Mrs. Sterling Mackenzie," Judge Hayes began, her voice carrying the weight of federal authority, "you have been found guilty of conspiracy, racketeering, mail fraud, wire fraud, and violation of civil rights under color of law. Your crimes weren't motivated by simple greed, but by a twisted ideology that sought to destroy the agricultural heritage of rural America under the guise of progress and development." The judge's words echoed through the packed courtroom like thunder, each syllable driving another nail into the coffin of Karen's criminal career. The sentencing was everything I'd hoped for, and more: 15 years in federal prison for Karen, with no possibility of parole for the first 8 years. Dr. Marcus Webb received 12 years for his role in falsifying veterinary inspections. The network of corrupted officials faced sentences ranging from 3 to 7 years. But the real victory came when Judge Hayes announced that Sterling Development Corporation would be dissolved and its assets liquidated, with the proceeds going to a victim compensation fund for affected ranchers. As the gavel fell, with the finality of justice served, I felt something release in my chest that I hadn't even realized I'd been holding. Karen's empire was gone. Her network destroyed, her ability to hurt other families permanently eliminated. She'd started her crusade believing she was honoring her dead son's memory, but she'd ended up becoming exactly the kind of predator she'd claimed to be fighting against. The aftermath brought changes that rippled far beyond Montana's borders. Agent Mitchell's investigation had exposed corruption in multiple federal agencies, leading to reforms that strengthened protection for agricultural properties nationwide. The case became required reading at law enforcement academies, a textbook example of how organized crime could hide behind suburban respectability and government authority. But the most meaningful change happened right here on my property. The federal government designated my Highland cattle herd as a protected genetic resource, ensuring that future generations would be able to witness these magnificent animals grazing on the same land their ancestors had called home for over a century. Miguel was hired as the official herd veterinarian, his principles and expertise finally receiving the recognition they deserved. Bobby Chen was not only cleared of all charges, but promoted to a federal liaison position, his moment of conscience, transforming him from a reluctant accomplice into a genuine hero. The ranch house felt different now, not just because it was mine again, but because it represented something larger than my family's legacy. Every morning when I walked out to check on the cattle, I thought about Dad's final words and the promise I'd made to protect what he'd left behind. The Highland cattle grazed peacefully in the early morning light, their russet coats gleaming like copper pennies, their ancient bloodlines carrying forward the dreams of immigrants who'd believed in the promise of American soil. Karen's attempts to destroy my ranch had ultimately made it stronger. The media attention brought visitors from around the world who wanted to see the cattle that had survived corporate assassination attempts. Agricultural universities sent students to study sustainable ranching practices that had been refined over 5 generations. The ranch became a living classroom where people could learn about heritage breeds and the importance of protecting agricultural diversity from corporate homogenization. Standing in the same field where Karen's hired guns had tried to murder my cattle, I realized that her greatest mistake had been underestimating the power of truth and the determination of people who refused to be victims. She'd brought lawyers, fake documents, and government corruption to a fight that was really about love, legacy, and the unbreakable bond between land and family. Money and power are formidable weapons, but they're no match for righteousness backed by evidence and supported by justice. The Highland cattle that grazed around me were more than just animals now. They were symbols of everything that survives when good people refuse to surrender to evil. Each morning brought new calves, new life, new hope that the future would honor the sacrifices of the past. Dad's promise had been kept, his legacy preserved, his faith in American justice ultimately vindicated. Sometimes the good guys do win, but only when they're willing to fight for what's right, document the truth, and never give up hope that justice will eventually prevail. Karen Sterling thought she could buy her way to redemption through the destruction of others, but she learned the hard way that some things can't be purchased, corrupted, or destroyed. The land remembers the truth, endures, and sometimes, if you're very lucky and very determined, justice does triumph over evil. This story of justice and perseverance offers a powerful lesson. Never underestimate the power of an individual or community united by truth and a willingness to fight for what's right. Even against seemingly insurmountable odds like a well-resourced conspiracy driven by greed and hidden motives, integrity and meticulous record-keeping can dismantle even the most elaborate schemes. It reminds us that while systems can be corrupted, the human spirit, driven by love for family heritage and justice, can ultimately prevail.